On a frozen mountain road where even the wind sounded tired, a deputy heard something that didn't belong to the night. Not a wolf, not the storm, but a broken cry, patient, restrained, and aching with survival. What he found hidden beneath the snow wasn't just an injured dog. It was a soul that had learned to endure pain in silence, waiting for someone to finally notice. That single moment would uncover a secret buried deep in the mountains and change the fate of a forgotten town, and a few forgotten lives, forever. What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. Winter arrived in Ashwood Falls, Montana, the way it always did, without apology and without haste. The town lay cupped between two mountain ridges like a fragile offering to the cold, its narrow streets buried under layers of packed snow that hadn't fully melted since November. Wooden storefronts stood stiff beneath ice-laden awnings, their paint faded by decades of wind and sun. At night, the town lights glowed faintly through drifting frost, as if even electricity struggled to survive here. The air smelled of pine resin and frozen earth. Every breath burned just enough to remind people they were still alive. Ashwood Falls was not a place people stumbled into. It was a place they either inherited, endured, or chose when the rest of the world had taken too much from them. Deputy Ethan Cole had inherited it. At 41, Ethan moved with the steady economy of a man who had learned long ago not to waste energy. He was tall without being imposing, broad-shouldered from years of labor rather than gym routines. His dark brown hair was kept short, more out of habit than vanity, and threaded with premature gray near the temples. A trimmed beard framed a face marked by angular cheekbones and a nose that had once been broken and never quite set straight again. His eyes were what people remembered, steel gray, observant, rarely revealing more than necessary. Ethan had been with the Ashwood Falls Sheriff's Department for 19 years. Before that, he had worked construction, then logging, then anything that paid steady enough to help his mother after his father's heart gave out too early. Stability mattered to him. Predictability mattered. Love had mattered once, too. 8 winters ago, his wife Claire had died on Route 17, her car sliding off black ice into a ravine no guardrail had ever bothered to protect. After that, something inside Ethan had gone quiet. Not broken, just muted. He still did his job well, still showed up early, still helped stranded motorists and checked on elderly residents during storms, but he no longer expected the world to offer anything beyond survival. That night, his patrol was supposed to be routine. The radio crackled with intermittent static as he drove the service road toward Ravenhook Ridge, a jagged stretch of elevation north of town. Reports of interference had been coming in for weeks, dropped signals, brief bursts of distortion, nothing consistent enough to warrant federal attention. Most blamed the weather. Ethan wasn't convinced, but he had learned to file away instincts until evidence caught up. The SUV's headlights cut twin paths through the snow. Wind pushed against the vehicle in steady gusts, rattling the antenna above. Then he heard it. At first, Ethan thought it was the wind, folding oddly through the rocks. Ravenhook Ridge had a way of playing tricks on sound, bending echoes into things that felt almost intentional. But the noise came again, low, fractured, unmistakably alive. Not a wolf. Too uneven, too restrained. Ethan eased the SUV to the shoulder and killed the engine. The sudden silence rang louder than the sound itself. He stepped out, boots crunching against ice-crusted snow, and listened. There it was again, a broken cry. Not loud enough to demand attention, just persistent enough to refuse being ignored. Ethan grabbed his flashlight and followed the sound upslope, weaving between wind-carved stones and stunted pines that leaned away from the ridge as if permanently bracing for impact. Snow clung to his jacket. His breath fogged the beam of light with every step. The sound grew clearer, closer. He crested a small rise and froze. Caught between two half-buried rocks lay a Belgian Malinois, fully grown, its muscular frame trembling violently against the cold. The dog's coat, once a rich tawny brown with black markings, was matted with dirt and frozen blood. One rear leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, caught tight in a rusted steel snare buried beneath the snow. Illegal, cruel, deliberate, the kind of trap that didn't care what suffered in it. The dog lifted its head slowly as Ethan approached. Its ears twitched, alert despite exhaustion. Amber eyes locked onto his with startling clarity. There was no snarl, no attempt to lunge or pull free, just stillness. And something else. An expression Ethan had only ever seen once before, in the mirror after Claire's funeral. Acceptance. Not of pain, but of waiting. "Easy," Ethan said quietly, lowering himself to one knee. His voice carried the calm authority he used with frightened people, the kind that didn't rush or demand. "I'm not here to hurt you." The dog watched him without blinking. Its chest rose and fell in shallow, controlled breaths, every movement measured, as if instinct had taught it that wasted energy could mean death. Up close, Ethan could see the animal was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 4 years old. Powerful shoulders, lean build. This wasn't a stray born on the mountain. This was a dog that had once been fed well, trained well, expected to perform. Ethan examined the snare carefully. The wire had cut deep into the flesh. Removing it would hurt. Leaving it would kill him. "I know," Ethan murmured, as if the dog had spoken. "We're going to get you out." Using his multi-tool, he worked slowly, deliberately. The dog flinched once, letting out a soft sound that barely qualified as a whine, then stilled himself again. When the trap finally loosened and snapped open, the dog collapsed sideways into the snow, exhausted. Ethan slid his arms beneath the animal, surprised by the weight. Solid, dense, alive. As he lifted him, the dog pressed weakly against Ethan's chest, warm breath seeping through layers of fabric. It wasn't trust yet. It was necessity, but it was enough. "You're all right," Ethan whispered. "I've got you." He carried the dog back toward the SUV. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of iron and pine and something else. Something sharp, almost electrical. Ethan paused, scanning the tree line. For a brief moment, he thought he saw movement between the trunks, a shape, too quick to define, then nothing. He placed the dog gently in the back seat, wrapping him in a spare blanket. The animal's eyes followed every movement, sharp and calculating, even through pain. Ethan started the engine. As the SUV rolled down from Ravenhook Ridge, the dog shifted slightly, turning his head toward the rear window, his gaze fixed on the dark silhouette of the mountain, unblinking. Ethan noticed. "You're not done with that place, are you?" he said softly. The dog didn't respond. He simply kept watching, as though something, or someone, still waited there. When the lights of Ashwood Falls finally came into view, Ethan felt an unfamiliar weight settle in his chest. This wasn't just a rescue, it was an opening. And the mountain, it seemed, had finally decided to answer back. Ashwood Falls did not truly wake in the morning. It thawed just enough to function. Frost loosened its grip on rooftops, snowbanks sagged under their own weight, and the town resumed its quiet routines with the resignation of people who knew winter was not finished with them yet. Deputy Ethan Cole had not slept. He sat at the small wooden table in the break room of the sheriff's substation, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone lukewarm, eyes fixed on the security monitor mounted high on the wall. The camera feed showed the rear outbuilding where the dog lay. The door was open, just as Ethan had left it. Beyond the threshold, snow drifted lazily across the yard. Inside the frame, the Belgian Malinois lay awake. Lumen had not moved all night. He rested on his belly atop a folded blanket, front legs tucked neatly beneath his chest, head raised just enough to watch the open doorway. His injured leg was bandaged roughly but securely, and though pain stiffened his movements, it had not dulled his awareness. His ears twitched at every distant sound, the groan of wind against the metal siding, the low hum of a passing plow, the faint creak of timber cooling after nightfall. Ethan had seen guard dogs before, farm dogs, police canines during joint operations. This was different. This dog was not guarding a space. He was guarding a direction. Ethan stood, pulled on his jacket, and stepped outside. Cold air bit into his face immediately. As he approached, Lumen's eyes tracked him, alert but calm. No growl, no retreat, just observation. "You didn't sleep at all, did you?" Ethan murmured. Lumen blinked once, slow and deliberate, then returned his gaze to the tree line beyond the yard. Ethan crouched beside him. Up close in the pale light of morning, the dog's condition was clearer. Beneath the grime and matted fur was a body built for endurance rather than brute force. Lean muscle, long legs, a narrow waist. His coat, tawny and darkened along the muzzle and back, was dulled by weeks, maybe months, of exposure. And there were scars, not fresh ones, old healed lines along the ribs, faint circular marks beneath the fur near the base of the neck. Too symmetrical, too precise. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Someone didn't just lose you," he said quietly. "They worked you." Lumen's ears flicked at the word, though his posture did not change. Inside the main building, the radio crackled to life. Ethan straightened and glanced toward the office. A familiar voice cut through the static. "Ethan, you up?" That was Sarah Whitcomb, the town's senior dispatcher. Sarah was 56, tall and wiry, with sharp cheekbones and posture honed by decades of sitting upright behind consoles rather than slouching into exhaustion. Her silver-streaked blonde hair was pulled back into a tight ponytail that never seemed to loosen, even after double shifts. She had raised 2 daughters alone after her husband left, when the girls were young, and the surer experience had sharpened her instincts. Sarah noticed patterns other people dismissed. "I'm up," Ethan replied, stepping inside. "What have you got?" "More interference," Sarah said. "Same band as before, north side of Ravenhook Ridge, and before you say weather, I checked. Nothing's moving that should be causing this." Ethan glanced back at the monitor. Lumen had shifted slightly, now standing, weight carefully balanced on 3 legs. "I was up there last night," Ethan said. "Found something?" Sarah paused. "Something alive?" "Yes." Another pause, longer this time. "I'll call Hannah," Sarah said finally. "You'll want her eyes on whatever you brought down." Dr. Hannah Moore arrived less than 30 minutes later, her old Subaru crunching into the lot under a fresh dusting of snow. She stepped out briskly, tall and athletic, her chestnut hair tucked beneath a knit cap, cheeks already flushed red from the cold. At 43, Hannah carried herself with a controlled confidence born from years of emergency triage work. Her brown eyes were kind but unflinching, the kind that did not shy away from unpleasant truths. She followed Ethan into the outbuilding, without comment. Lumen watched her approach with measured interest. His ears lifted slightly, but he did not bare his teeth or pull away. When Hannah knelt, she moved slowly, deliberately, keeping her hands visible. "Hey there," she said softly. "I'm not here to rush you." Lumen sniffed once, then stilled. "That's not a stray," Hannah said quietly, almost to herself, as she examined the bandage and then the scars along his side. "This is a working dog. Or was." She traced a faint circular mark near his neck, fingers barely grazing the fur. Lumen stiffened, not aggressively, but reflexively. Hannah froze. "All right, that's enough." She leaned back, meeting Ethan's eyes. "This dog has been through structured conditioning," she said. "Extended, likely harsh, and whatever he was trained for, he doesn't associate enclosed spaces with safety." Ethan nodded. "He won't stay inside unless the door's open." "That tracks," Hannah replied. "So does this." She gestured toward the dog's unbroken vigilance. Whatever happened to him didn't end on that mountain. As if summoned by the words, a truck rolled slowly past the fence bordering the station lot. A black pickup, lifted slightly, its windows tinted dark. It did not stop, but it slowed. The driver glanced toward the outbuilding. Lumen's body went rigid. A low sound vibrated in his chest. Not a growl, not a bark, something deeper. Ethan stepped instinctively between the dog and the fence, his hand resting near his holster. The truck continued down the road. Hannah frowned. "Friend of yours?" "No," Ethan said, "and he's not local." Lumen did not relax until the vehicle disappeared from sight. Later that afternoon, Ethan sat, with Sheriff Mark Halverson in the front office. Mark was nearing 60, heavy-set with a thick gray mustache and hands permanently stained with ink and coffee. He'd been sheriff since Ethan was a rookie, and while age had softened his gait, it had not dulled his skepticism. "A dog with scars and a mystery doesn't make a federal case," Mark said, leaning back in his chair. "Not yet." "Radio interference," Ethan replied. "Illegal traps, unmarked vehicles watching the station. It's lining up." Mark exhaled slowly. "You saying someone's operating on that ridge?" "I'm saying someone was," Ethan corrected. "And I don't think they're done." That evening, Ethan returned to the outbuilding with a bowl of food and a fresh blanket. Lumen ate slowly, methodically, pausing often to listen. When Ethan tried to close the door halfway to block the wind, Lumen immediately stopped eating. Ethan reopened it. "All right," he said quietly. "We'll do it your way." As night settled again over Ashwood Falls, snow began to fall in earnest. Thick flakes drifted through the open doorway, melting on the concrete floor. Lumen stood and moved closer to the threshold, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the yard. Ethan followed his gaze. Far off, beyond the trees, something echoed faintly across Ravenhook Ridge. Not a howl. Not quite. Lumen's ears snapped forward, and for the first time since Ethan had found him, the dog let out a sound that carried no pain at all, only warning. Morning came reluctantly to Ashwood Falls, filtered through a sky the color of old steel. Snow still fell, lighter now, but persistent, as if the mountains were reluctant to let go of what they had claimed all winter. The town moved slowly beneath it, doors opening later than usual, engines idling longer, conversations shortened by cold air and unspoken unease. Deputy Ethan Cole stood near the edge of the station yard, hands tucked into the pockets of his heavy jacket, watching Lumen move. For the first time since the rescue, the dog had ventured a few steps beyond the outbuilding. His gait was cautious but controlled, the injured leg still stiff yet bearing weight. He stopped often, lifting his head to scent the air, amber eyes scanning the perimeter with a focus that never softened. Snow clung to the darker fur along his back, highlighting the sharp lines of his build. Lean, powerful, efficient. Up close, Ethan guessed again at his age. 4, maybe 5 years old. Old enough to have learned discipline, young enough to still endure it. "You're mapping the place," Ethan murmured. "Aren't you?" Lumen did not look at him, but his ears flicked, acknowledging the sound. The radio on Ethan's belt crackled. Sarah Whitcomb's voice came through, tight with restrained irritation. "Ethan, heads up. You've got a visitor." Ethan glanced toward the front of the station. A man stood near the entrance, hands resting loosely at his sides, posture relaxed in a way that felt practiced rather than natural. Ethan recognized him immediately. The black pickup from the day before sat parked across the street. The man was in his mid-40s, tall and broad, with a frame built more by deliberate maintenance than physical labor. His beard was neatly trimmed, salt and pepper, framing a jawline that might have been handsome if not for the sharpness in his expression. Light-colored eyes, gray or pale blue, took in details quickly, lingering just long enough to be uncomfortable. His dark coat was expensive, the kind designed to look rugged, while never actually being tested by the elements. This was Clayton Rusk. Clayton turned as Ethan approached and smiled, an easy curve of the mouth that did not reach his eyes. "Deputy Cole," he said, voice smooth, "didn't expect to find you out here so early." "Long nights do that," Ethan replied evenly. "What can I do for you?" Clayton's gaze drifted, casual but unmistakable, toward the outbuilding. "I heard you had an incident up on Ravenhook Ridge," he said. "Word travels fast in a town this size." "Depends on the word," Ethan said. Clayton chuckled softly. "Fair enough. I'm with North Spire Solutions. We're conducting geological surveys in the area. Some of our contractors reported unusual animal activity. Thought it best to check in." Lumen had stopped moving. His body went rigid, tail low, muscles tensed beneath his coat. His eyes locked onto Clayton with a stillness that felt heavy, deliberate. Clayton noticed. "Well," he said lightly, "that must be him." Ethan stepped subtly to the side, placing himself between the man and the dog. "You're staring at a wounded animal on county property, that's all." Clayton raised his hands in a mock gesture of peace. "Didn't mean any offense, just, that's a fine specimen. Belgian Malinois, right? Not common around here." Ethan felt something tighten behind his ribs. "You know dogs." "I know assets," Clayton corrected, then smiled again as if the word were a joke. "Used to consult on security contracts back east. Dogs, systems, people, same principles apply." Lumen's low, warning rumble began again, barely audible but unmistakable. Clayton took a step back. "Temperamental?" "Traumatized," Ethan replied. "Which is why you'll keep your distance." Clayton studied him for a moment longer, eyes narrowing slightly, then nodded. "Of course, I wouldn't want to interfere with your work, Deputy." As he turned to leave, Clayton paused. "Careful up there on the ridge," he added. "Some things are better left buried." He walked away without another word. Ethan exhaled slowly, watching until the man disappeared into his truck and drove off. Behind him, Lumen remained tense, eyes fixed on the road long after the pickup vanished. "You've seen him before," Ethan said quietly. Lumen did not deny it. Later that afternoon, Ethan drove toward the edge of town, following up on a call from Maggie Holloway, a rancher whose family had worked land east of Ravenhook Ridge for 3 generations. Maggie was in her early 60s, sun-weathered and sharp-eyed, her gray hair braided down her back beneath a battered felt hat. She met Ethan by the fence line, leaning on the post with a posture that suggested she'd learned long ago not to waste movement. "You hear about the horses?" she asked. "I heard you had trouble last night," Ethan said. "Trouble's one word," Maggie replied. "Spooked my gelding so bad he snapped his lead rope clean. And that horse weighs 1,200 pounds. She led Ethan toward the stable. One stall showed signs of disturbance, hoof marks gouged deep into the packed earth, boards scratched, a gate twisted at its hinges. "No predators did this," Maggie said flatly. "Whatever it was didn't want the horses. It wanted through." Ethan studied the ground. There were tracks, boot prints, partially obscured by snow, leading toward the ridge. "Company's been poking around more than usual," Maggie added. "Men I don't recognize. They don't look like surveyors." As Ethan turned back toward town, Lumen shifted in the passenger seat, alert again, ears pricked toward the mountains. That evening, Hannah Moore stopped by the station with updated medical supplies. She examined Lumen again, her brow furrowing as she felt along his neck and shoulders. "These marks," she said quietly, "they're not just scars, they're placement points." "For what?" Ethan asked. "Implants," Hannah replied. "Tracking, stimulation, control. If they're gone now, someone removed them, recently." Ethan looked down at Lumen, who stood patiently despite the discomfort. "So, someone invested a lot in him. And wants their investment back," Hannah said. Night settled quickly, snow tapered off, leaving the town wrapped in a brittle stillness. Ethan returned to the outbuilding one last time before heading upstairs. Lumen lay near the open door, watching the dark. Then his head snapped up. A sound carried faintly from Ravenhook Ridge, not one voice, several, distant, coordinated. Ethan felt the hair on his arms rise. Lumen stood, every muscle drawn tight, eyes burning with recognition and something close to urgency. Ethan followed his gaze into the darkness. Whatever had shaped Lumen had not stopped with him, and whatever waited on the mountain was beginning to move. Darkness settled over Ashwood Falls with unusual speed, as if the day had been pulled away rather than allowed to fade. The sky was moonless, sealed shut by thick cloud cover that trapped sound and light alike. Snow no longer fell, but the cold sharpened, tightening its grip on the town until even familiar shapes looked foreign and under the street lamps. Deputy Ethan Cole locked the front doors of the substation later than usual. He moved with quiet efficiency, checking windows, testing the radio twice, then once more. The static lingered in brief, irregular pulses, like something brushing against the signal rather than breaking it outright. He did not like patterns he could not explain. Outside, the yard behind the station lay silent. The outbuilding door remained open, just wide enough for light and air to pass through. Ethan had tried closing it earlier, inch by inch, but Lumen's response had been immediate. Food abandoned, body stiffened, eyes fixed on the narrowing gap until Ethan had relented. Now the Belgian Malinois lay just inside the threshold, positioned precisely where the concrete met the snow. His injured leg was stretched carefully to one side, his posture balanced to allow movement without hesitation. His breathing was slow, controlled, but his eyes remained open, reflecting the weak bulb overhead. Ethan crouched beside him. "If they come," he murmured, "we deal with it together." Lumen did not look at him. He did not need to. Shortly after midnight, the first sound came, not from the ridge, but from behind the station, a soft metallic click. Ethan froze. His hand went instinctively to his sidearm, fingers resting against the grip. He waited, listening past his own breathing, past the low hum of the generator. The click came again, followed by the faint scrape of rubber against gravel. Someone was being careful. Ethan stepped backward, drawing closer to the outbuilding. Lumen was already rising, weight shifting forward, ears angled sharply, toward the fence line. His body language had changed entirely, not frantic, not aggressive, focused, trained. A shadow detached itself from the darkness near the back gate. Then another. Both figures wore dark clothing that absorbed light, faces obscured by low-profile masks. They moved with controlled precision, spacing themselves without words, one circling wide while the other advanced toward the outbuilding. Ethan's pulse spiked, but his voice remained steady. "Sheriff's Department," he called out. "You're trespassing." The nearer figure paused. The other did not. Lumen moved. He crossed the distance in a blur of muscle and intent, launching himself not at the closest target, but at the one angling for Ethan's blind side. His timing was flawless. He struck high, knocking the man off balance, jaws closing on padded fabric rather than flesh. The impact drove both into the snow. The second intruder reacted instantly, reaching inside his jacket. Ethan fired, not at the man, but at the ground near his feet. The shot cracked through the night, echoing off nearby buildings. The man hesitated just long enough. Lumen twisted, released, and repositioned, teeth bared now, eyes burning with something colder than anger. Not hatred, recognition. The first intruder groaned, trying to scramble backward. Lumen planted himself between the men and the outbuilding, stance wide, tail rigid, issuing a low, continuous warning that vibrated through the ground. Ethan advanced, weapon raised. On the ground, now! The second man slowly lifted his hands. Up close, Ethan could see him clearly. Late 20s, lean, with sharp cheekbones and skin pulled tight over muscle. His hair was cropped short, military neat. His eyes flicked repeatedly toward Lumen, measuring distance, timing, options. A professional. Ethan cuffed him quickly, then turned his attention to the other intruder, who lay stunned, breath ragged. This one was older, early 40s, heavier build, with a dark beard streaked prematurely gray. There was a scar along his jawline, pale and jagged, the kind left by shrapnel or a blade. His movements were slower, but no less deliberate. "What company?" Ethan demanded. The younger man said nothing. Lumen's growl deepened. The older man swallowed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said hoarsely. Ethan leaned closer. "For who?" Neither answered. Ethan searched them methodically. No insignia, no IDs, only equipment. Compact stun devices, zip restraints, and in the older man's vest pocket, a waterproof sleeve. Inside were photographs. Lumen. From multiple angles, some recent, some older. Each marked with a symbol Ethan did not recognize, a stylized arc over a dot, followed by a simple designation, H-17. Ethan's stomach tightened. "You were supposed to be quiet," the older man muttered, eyes flicking toward Lumen. "This one never was." Lumen lunged forward a fraction, jaws snapping inches from the man's face. The message was unmistakable. Ethan secured both intruders inside the holding room, locking the reinforced door behind them. He radioed Sheriff Halverson, voice clipped but controlled, requesting immediate backup and notifying Sarah to restrict outgoing communications. Sarah's response was immediate. "Already done. And Ethan, there's something else." "What?" Multiple pings just lit up north of Ravenhook Ridge. Not radio, something else. Whatever it is, it's moving. Ethan returned to the outbuilding. Lumen stood exactly where he had been before the confrontation, though his chest now rose faster, adrenaline still coursing through his body. A thin line of blood marked the snow near his mouth, not his own. "You did good," Ethan said quietly. Lumen finally looked at him. There was no pride in his gaze, only urgency. As dawn crept closer, Hannah Moore arrived, coat thrown hastily over her scrubs. She examined Lumen carefully, noting a new tear along his shoulder, shallow but bleeding. "He knew exactly how to engage," she said softly. "Not instinct, memory." Sheriff Halverson arrived shortly after, face pale beneath his mustache as he reviewed the evidence. "This isn't a contractor problem," he said. "This is organized." "And Lumen is the reason they're here," Ethan replied. Outside, the first light of morning brushed the tops of the mountains. Ravenhook Ridge stood quiet, unchanged, as if it had witnessed nothing at all. But Lumen watched it with unwavering intensity. Whatever waited there had sent men into the night, and it would not stop now. Morning did not bring relief. It only clarified what the night had already revealed. Ashwood Falls woke beneath a sky scraped thin and colorless, the kind that made the mountains look closer than they were. Ravenhook Ridge loomed with quiet confidence, its tree line sharp against the pale horizon. To anyone else, it looked unchanged. To Ethan Cole, it felt like a held breath. The two intruders remained in custody, silent and watchful, refusing names and offering nothing beyond tight-lipped compliance. Sheriff Halverson had contacted state authorities, but responses came slow and cautious, buried in jurisdictional uncertainty. Whatever symbol marked those photographs, H-17, it did not exist in any database they were allowed to access. Ethan had stopped waiting for permission. He stood at the edge of the station yard, tightening the straps of his pack, while Lumen watched from a few feet away. The dog's wound had been cleaned again at dawn, Hannah's careful hands steady as she worked. Lumen tolerated the treatment without resistance, eyes fixed on the direction of the ridge, body humming with restrained energy. He looked stronger already, pain folding inward beneath purpose. "You sure you're up for this?" Hannah asked quietly, her voice low so it wouldn't carry. She stood straight despite exhaustion, her shoulders squared beneath her coat, dark circles shadowing her eyes. She had stayed through the night, documenting injuries, reviewing photos taken from the intruder's gear, assembling fragments of a picture she didn't yet want to name. Lumen stepped closer to Ethan, pressing his shoulder lightly against Ethan's thigh. Hannah saw it and nodded once. "That answers it." Ethan didn't bring a full team. He brought what he trusted. The first was Eli Boone, a wildlife tracker who lived alone in a weather-beaten cabin east of town. Eli was 62, tall and narrow, with a stooped posture that came not from weakness but from years of reading, the ground rather than the horizon. His beard was long and gray, usually tied at the base of his neck, his skin darkened by sun and wind. Eli spoke little and listened deeply. He had once guided search and rescue teams after a mine collapse years earlier, an event that took two close friends and taught him that preparation mattered more than hope. The second was Lumen. They left in Ethan's SUV just after sunrise, turning off the main road well before the ridge and continuing on foot through a dense stand of firs. Snow muffled their steps. The air grew colder as they climbed, thinner and sharper, carrying a scent that made Lumen slow and lift his head. Eli noticed. "He's reading something," he said quietly. "Not the trail," Ethan replied. "The memory." They moved carefully, Lumen leading without pulling, choosing a route that avoided open ground. His injured leg slowed him, but he adjusted instinctively, shifting weight, conserving energy. Eli followed his tracks with interest, noting how the dog avoided broken branches and wind-blown snow, how he circled wide around certain outcroppings. "He's been here before," Eli murmured, "more than once." They found the first sign near a collapsed rock shelf. The ground was disturbed, snow packed unnaturally hard in a rough rectangle. Eli knelt, brushing frost aside with gloved hands. "Door," he said, "covered well, recently used." Ethan felt the tension settle into his spine. Lumen approached, sniffed once, then stepped back, ears flattening slightly. His body stiffened, not with fear, but with recognition. A low sound escaped his throat, more breath than voice. Ethan reached for the concealed handle and pulled. The hatch opened with a reluctant groan, revealing a narrow stairwell descending into darkness. Cold air rose from below, tinged with metal, oil, and something faintly chemical. Eli exhaled slowly. "That's not old." They descended with caution. The stairs opened into a concrete chamber lit by emergency strips along the walls, still functioning, humming softly. The space was larger than Ethan expected, too organized to be abandoned, too clean to be forgotten. Cages lined one wall, not kennels, cages. Heavy steel, reinforced at the corners, some bent outward as if struck from inside. Scratch marks scored the floors. Dried blood darkened the seams where concrete met metal. Lumen moved forward despite Ethan's quiet command, stopping at the third cage from the end. He pressed his nose against the bars and stood there, unmoving. Ethan crouched beside him. "You were kept here." Lumen did not respond, but his breathing changed, shorter, tighter. Ethan noticed a faint marking etched into the metal, nearly worn smooth, the same arc and dot symbol from the photographs. H-17. Beyond the cages lay a training area. Weighted harnesses hung from hooks. Shock collars lay scattered across a table, their surfaces scratched and cracked. A treadmill stood against the far wall, industrial grade, its belt scarred by claw marks. Eli walked to the perimeter, eyes narrowing. "This wasn't just obedience training," he said. "This was conditioning, breaking resistance." Ethan found a desk near the back, papers strewn hastily, as if someone had left in a rush. Most were coded, but one page bore handwritten notes, hurried and uneven. Asset compliance failing, increased independent response, retrieval authorized. Ethan folded the page carefully. From deeper within the facility came a sound, not mechanical, alive. Lumen reacted instantly, turning toward a darker corridor branching off the main chamber. His ears pricked forward, body angling protectively between Ethan and the passage. Eli followed his gaze. "We're not alone." They advanced slowly. The corridor opened into a smaller room where the air felt heavier, warmer. In the corner, partially hidden behind overturned equipment, lay another dog. a German shepherd. Young, maybe 3 years old. His coat was thick but filthy, ribs visible beneath the fur. One ear was torn, the edge ragged and scarred. His chest rose in shallow, uneven breaths. The dog lifted his head weakly as they approached. Lumen stopped a few feet away. For a moment, neither moved. Then Lumen lowered himself to the ground, front legs folded, posture deliberately non-threatening. The shepherd's tail twitched once. Recognition flickered in his dull eyes. Ethan felt his throat tighten. "You weren't the only one," he whispered. The shepherd tried to stand and failed, collapsing back onto the concrete with a lost key and exhausted sound. Ethan moved quickly, checking for injuries. A deep gash ran along the hind leg, poorly healed, inflamed. Beneath the fur at the base of his neck, Ethan felt a familiar raised scar. Another placement point. Eli shook his head slowly. "They left him." "No," Ethan said. "He stayed alive." They carried the shepherd out together, Lumen walking close, glancing back, repeatedly as if expecting pursuit. Outside, the cold air hit them like a shock, but the dog breathed easier almost immediately. Ethan wrapped his jacket around the shepherd and looked down at him. "You're not a number anymore," he said quietly. "You get a name." The dog's eyes fluttered open. "Mercy," Ethan decided, "because you shouldn't have survived." "And you did." Lumen nudged the shepherd's shoulder gently, then looked up at Ethan, urgency still sharp in his gaze. They sealed the hatch as best they could and began the descent back toward town. Behind them, Ravenhook Ridge stood silent, giving nothing away. But Ethan knew the truth now. Whatever had been built beneath the mountain was not finished, and Lumen was not the only one who had escaped. The mountains did not give up their secrets all at once. They released them the way they release snowmelt in spring, slow, deliberate, and only when the ground beneath was ready to receive the truth. By the time Ethan Cole brought Mercy back to Ashwood Falls, the sun was already slipping behind the western ridge, staining the snow with a dull copper light. Mercy lay in the back of the SUV, wrapped in layers of blankets, his breathing shallow but steady. Hannah Moore met them at the station with practiced urgency, her face tight with focus as she assessed the dog's injuries. Mercy was alive, but just barely. Infection had set in. Dehydration had hollowed him out. Whatever had happened beneath Ravenhook Ridge, he had survived it by instinct alone. Lumen refused to leave Mercy's side. He paced the perimeter of the garage, stopping every few steps to check the injured shepherd, nose hovering inches above Mercy's flank, as if counting each breath. When Hannah tried to guide him, back, Lumen stiffened, not aggressively, but with a quiet refusal that made his meaning clear. Hannah exhaled softly. "All right," she said. "You stay." Ethan watched the two dogs together and felt something shift in his chest. Lumen's vigilance had always been sharp, almost solitary. Now it had direction, purpose. Mercy wasn't just another victim, he was proof that Lumen had not been the only one who made it out. That night, while Hannah worked and Sheriff Halverson coordinated quietly with state officials, Ethan sat with Eli Boone at the small table in the station's break room. Eli sipped black coffee, eyes distant, hands wrapped loosely around the mug. "I've seen places like that before," Eli said after a long pause. "Not here. Different mountains. Same idea. People who think they can shape nature if they push hard enough." "How many do you think got out?" Ethan asked. Eli shook his head. "Enough to matter, not enough to feel safe." The answer sat heavy between them. Near midnight, Lumen lifted his head sharply. Ethan felt it too. A subtle change in the air, like pressure before a storm. Not sound exactly, but absence of it. The wind outside had dropped. The building seemed to hold its breath. Lumen moved to the open doorway and stood perfectly still. Then he let out a low, resonant sound. Not a bark, not a growl, but something in between. It carried intent. Eli set his mug down. "That's a signal," he said quietly. "Not for us." Ethan grabbed his jacket and radio. "You're saying he's calling them?" "I'm saying he knows they're close enough to hear." They moved out behind the station, snow crunching underfoot. The town lights fell away quickly, swallowed by trees and shadow. Lumen led without hesitation, favoring his injured leg but refusing to slow. Ethan followed, breath burning in his chest, senses sharpened by instinct rather than training. They didn't go back toward the main facility. Instead, Lumen angled east, down a narrow ravine that cut away from Ravenhook Ridge like a hidden vein. The path was barely visible beneath snow and fallen branches. Eli studied the ground as they moved, his expression tightening. "There's traffic here," he said. "Recent. Dogs, more than one." The ravine opened into a clearing dotted with deadfall and ice-crusted brush. At its far edge stood an old line shack, little more than a collapsed wooden structure, half buried in snow. The roof had caved in years ago. No one used it anymore. Lumen slowed. From inside the wreckage came a faint sound, a whimper. Ethan raised his hand, signaling Eli to stop. He approached slowly, heart pounding, every sense tuned toward the fragile noise ahead. Behind a fallen beam lay another dog. This one was younger than Mercy, a sable-coated shepherd mix, perhaps 2 years old, with oversized paws and a narrow chest that suggested he hadn't yet filled out. One eye was swollen shut, the fur surrounding it darkened with dried blood. A crude collar hung loose around his neck, snapped at the buckle. The dog tried to rise when he saw Lumen, failed, and pressed himself low to the ground instead, trembling. Lumen did something unexpected. He sat, not submissive, not dominant, simply still. The younger dog froze, ears twitching. Then, slowly, he crawled forward, dragging his hind leg awkwardly. When he reached Lumen, he pressed his forehead briefly against Lumen's chest and let out a breath that sounded like surrender. Ethan swallowed hard. "Easy," he murmured, kneeling. "You're safe. You're safe now." The dog's injuries were fresh, bruising along the ribs, a shallow puncture wound on the shoulder, no surgical scars at the neck. Yet. Ethan recognized the implication immediately. "They hadn't finished with him," he said quietly. Eli nodded, "which means they didn't finish with the others either." They carried the young dog back toward town, Lumen walking close, occasionally nudging him as if to keep him conscious. Hannah took one look at the dog and shook her head. "This one's lucky," she said. "Hurt, but not broken. Not yet." She cleaned his wounds carefully, speaking softly the entire time. The dog flinched at first, then slowly relaxed, eyes never leaving Lumen. When Hannah finished, Ethan crouched beside him. "You need a name," Ethan said. He thought for a moment. "Chance." The dog's tail thumped weakly once. By dawn, Mercy was stable. Chance slept curled tightly against Lumen, his breathing deep and even. Lumen rested too, but lightly, one eye always open. Ethan stepped outside as the first light crept over Ashwood Falls. The town looked the same as it always did, quiet, stubborn, unaware of how close danger had come to settling into its bones. Sheriff Halverson joined him, pulling his coat tighter against the cold. "State's still dragging their feet," he said. "They want more proof, more bodies." Ethan stared toward the mountains. "We don't have time for that." "No," Halverson agreed. "We don't." From the ridge, faint and distant, came another sound. This one wasn't pain. It wasn't fear. It was response. Lumen lifted his head, his ears pricked forward, body tense but steady. Whatever he heard carried meaning only he fully understood, but Ethan caught the weight of it. Someone was still out there, and they were listening. The mountains answered at dusk. It began as a vibration underfoot, subtle enough to be mistaken for distant thunder, though the sky remained clear and hard as glass. Ashwood Falls stood braced beneath it, lights flickering once before steadying, radios hissing with brief, directionless static. To anyone else, it would have felt like weather. To Ethan Cole, it felt like a decision had been made. Lumen stood at the threshold of the garage, body aligned toward Ravenhook Ridge, ears forward, tail low, and still. Mercy slept fitfully inside, his breath shallow but regular, while Chance curled tight against the wall, young muscles twitching in uneasy dreams. Lumen did not move to wake them. Whatever he sensed was not meant for the wounded. Ethan tightened his jacket and checked his radio. Sheriff Halverson had finally secured limited state support. 2 troopers en route, arrival uncertain. It would not be soon enough. Eli Boone waited by the truck, already shouldering his pack, his long, gray beard tucked against the cold. His eyes were steady, resigned. "They won't stop," Eli said quietly. "Not now." "I know," Ethan replied. "So we end it." They moved out as the last of the light drained from the valley, following Lumen along a route that cut higher and steeper than before. Snow thinned to ice. Wind carved sound into narrow channels, carrying whispers that weren't quite words. As they climbed, Lumen slowed, testing the air, choosing the ground with care. He was not tracking footprints anymore. He was tracking intention. They reached a narrow shelf overlooking the ravine where Chance had been found. Below, a line of vehicles sat hidden beneath camouflage netting. 2 SUVs and a box truck, engines warm. A temporary floodlight cast a white rectangle onto the snow near a portable structure that looked like a communications tent. Antennas rose like skeletal fingers, angled toward the ridge. Eli swore under his breath. They're still operating. A man stepped into the light. He was tall and lean, mid-50s, with a narrow face cut by sharp planes and a beard worn close to the skin, iron gray and meticulously trimmed. His hair was longer than fashion allowed, pulled back at the nape, revealing a scar that traced the curve behind his left ear. He wore a dark field jacket with no markings and gloves that had seen use. When he moved, it was with the economy of someone who had learned long ago that hesitation costs lives. This was Dr. Rowan Hale. Ethan recognized the name from a briefing he had once skimmed years ago, an engineer turned behavioral systems specialist, quietly dismissed from a federal research consortium after ethical violations were resolved internally. Hale had vanished into consultancy work, his methods lauded in closed rooms and denied in public. Hale spoke without raising his voice. "Bring the dog forward." Lumen stiffened. Ethan stepped out of cover, weapon low but ready. "You're done here," he said. "This ends tonight." Hale's eyes flicked to Lumen with an intensity that bordered on reverence. "That one never listened," he said calmly. "Adaptive defiance. Fascinating, really. We compensated by improving retrieval." A handler moved at the edge of the light, a stocky man in his 30s with a shaved head and heavy stubble, shoulders squared like a doorframe. His posture suggested discipline without imagination. He held a compact device in gloved hands. "Don't," Ethan warned. The handler hesitated. Lumen moved. He did not charge. He advanced in a straight line, controlled, deliberate, eyes locked on Hale. Every step was measured, the injured leg accounted for without slowing his pace. The handler raised the device, and nothing happened. Hale's brow creased. "That's impossible." Eli had already cut the antenna feed. The static died. The floodlight flickered. Ethan fired once, shattering the light. Darkness surged back, broken only by headlamps and the glow of the tent. Chaos rippled outward. A shout. Boots on ice. Metal clanged. Lumen launched, taking the handler high, knocking him into the snow. The device skidded away. Another man rushed forward and stopped short when Lumen turned, teeth bared, breath steaming, warning unmistakable. Hale did not run. He stood his ground, watching with an expression that was not anger, but disappointment. "You could have been extraordinary," he said to Lumen. "You still could." Lumen answered with a sound that carried the mountain in it. Ethan closed the distance and cuffed Hale, wrenching his arms back. Hale did not resist. Up close, Ethan saw the lines etched around the man's eyes, not from laughter, but from vigilance. A life spent believing ends justified means. "Where are the others?" Ethan demanded. Hale smiled thinly. "Alive," he said, "because he taught them to be." A sudden movement to the east drew their attention. Shapes broke from the trees, dogs, 3 of them, moving low and fast. Shepherds, lean and scarred, eyes bright with a feral intelligence sharpened by survival. They halted when Lumen stepped forward. For a heartbeat, the ridge held its breath. Then the dogs came to him, not as subordinates, as kin. Ethan felt something loosen in his chest he hadn't realized was tight. State troopers arrived minutes later, lights cutting through the dark. Orders barked, clean and loud. Hale was led away, silent now, his gaze never leaving Lumen. The handlers were secured. The equipment was seized. The box truck doors opened to reveal crates, empty. The dogs remained where they were, clustered near Lumen, uncertain but unafraid. One was older, grizzled around the muzzle, ribs visible beneath a thick coat. Another limped slightly, favoring a foreleg. The third stood tall and alert, eyes tracking every movement. Ethan knelt slowly. "You're safe," he said, keeping his voice steady. "It's over." Lumen looked back, at him, then at the dogs, and finally toward the dark where Hale had been taken. He did not follow. Dawn found them descending together, the rescued dogs moving under their own power, guided by Lumen's calm presence. In Ashwood Falls, Hannah waited with blankets and warm hands. Mercy stirred when he sensed them, tail thumping weakly. Chance woke and pressed close to Lumen's shoulder. The mountain was quiet again, not because it had nothing left to say, but because it had been heard. Spring did not arrive in Ashwood Falls all at once. It came in small concessions. The drip of snowmelt from eaves, the softening of the ground beneath boots, the way the wind lost its knife edge and began to smell faintly of wet pine and earth. The mountains remained, as they always had, but their silence no longer felt watchful. It felt settled. The town adjusted in quiet ways. Radios stopped hissing. Nights grew longer between disturbances. People spoke more easily in the diner again, laughter returning in careful increments, as if no one wanted to jinx the calm by naming it too loudly. Ethan Cole felt the change most clearly at dawn. He stood outside the station garage one morning, coffee warming his hands, watching Lumen move across the yard. The Belgian Malinois no longer held himself like a drawn wire. His steps were still precise. Discipline did not vanish overnight, but the constant tension had eased. His injured leg had healed well under Hannah Moore's relentless care, leaving only a faint hitch in his stride that became less noticeable by the day. Nearby, Mercy lay in a patch of early sun, his once ragged coat cleaned and brushed, ribs no longer visible beneath the fur. He was older now, in ways that had nothing to do with age, but his eyes were softer, less haunted. Chance, still young and awkward in his limbs, chased a scrap of wind-blown paper along the fence, skidding to a stop and looking back at Lumen for approval. Lumen watched, then turned away, not dismissive, but trusting. Inside the station, Sheriff Halverson signed the last of the paperwork with a heavy exhale. "State's closing the case," he said, pushing his chair back. "Federal oversight satisfied. Hale's not walking free, ever." Ethan nodded. "And the dogs?" "Declared unassigned," Halverson replied. "No agency claims, no owner of record. They're unclaimed." The word landed softly, but its meaning was enormous. Hannah arrived later that morning, coat slung over her arm, hair loose for once. She carried a file tucked under one elbow and a look of cautious optimism she didn't often allow herself. "I've finished the evaluations," she said. "Physical, behavioral, they're cleared." "For what?" Ethan asked, though he already knew. "For a life," Hannah said simply. The town council meeting that evening was informal by design. Folding chairs filled the community hall, boots tracked in mud instead of snow, and the windows were cracked open to let the mild air pass through. Maggie Holloway sat near the back, arms crossed, her lined face attentive. Eli Boone leaned against the wall, hands folded, eyes thoughtful. Sarah Whitcomb stood by the coffee urn, quietly refilling cups and listening more than she spoke. Ethan stood when it was his turn, Lumen seated at his side, posture calm, head level. Mercy lay nearby, content, while Chance hovered between chairs, accepting tentative pats from children brave enough to approach. "These dogs saved lives," Ethan said. "Not because they were told to, because they chose to. What happens next shouldn't be another order." No one argued. The vote was unanimous, though it hardly felt necessary. Ashwood Falls would not cage them, register them, or turn them into symbols. They would remain free, watched over by the town rather than owned by it. If they worked, searching trails, alerting during storms, it would be by instinct and choice, not command. Afterward, as the hall emptied, an older man approached Ethan. He introduced himself as Thomas Avery, a retired carpenter with hands like gnarled roots and a voice softened by age. His hair was white and thinning, his beard neatly trimmed. "I'd like to make something," he said, "if you'll allow it." Thomas returned a week later with a small wooden marker, sanded smooth, the grain warm and honest beneath the hand. The words were burned carefully into the surface, letters dark against pale, oak. Ethan carried it up Ravenhook Ridge at dawn, Lumen and the others moving ahead, familiar with the path now without being bound to it. The air was clear, birdsong threading through the trees. When they reached the overlook where the valley opened wide below, Ethan placed the marker into the soil, pressing it down until it held. The words read, "They were never lost. They were finding their way home." Lumen sat beside it, gaze sweeping the town below. Mercy settled at his flank. Chance lay down last, sighing deeply, as if some internal weight had finally been set aside. Ethan stayed with them for a while, saying nothing. When he stood to leave, Lumen rose too, then paused. He looked back once at the marker, then at Ethan. It was not a farewell. It was a choice. Life in Ashwood Falls found a new rhythm. Hannah opened a small clinic on Main Street, its windows bright and welcoming, a hand-painted sign swinging gently above the door. She called it Second Path Veterinary, and it became a place people brought not just animals, but stories of fear, of hope, of things that had survived despite the odds. Chance grew quickly, his awkwardness smoothing into strength. He learned the town by heart, every corner and trail, every scent worth remembering. Mercy took longer, his body slower to trust peace, but he found purpose in quiet companionship, often resting near the station door where he could feel the world pass by without being pulled into it. Lumen remained what he had always been, aware, deliberate, but now he slept, truly slept. Ethan noticed it one afternoon when he found Lumen stretched out in the shade behind the garage, chest rising and falling in a deep, even rhythm. No twitching paws, no half-open eyes, just rest. Ethan sat down nearby, back against the wall, and closed his eyes too. The sound of wind through trees filled the space where noise used to live. The mountains watched, but they no longer waited. Ashwood Falls did not claim the dogs as heroes. It did not need to. They became part of the place the way old roads and stubborn pines did, present, enduring, unremarkable, only because they belonged. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or light. Sometimes they come quietly, on four tired legs, in the exact moment someone chooses not to walk away. This story reminds us that God's work is often hidden in ordinary places, in cold nights, in wounded souls, and in the simple decision to stay when it would be easier to leave. Lumen and the others were never meant to survive what they endured, but grace does not ask permission from cruelty, and love, true love, refuses to let suffering have the final word. In our own lives, we may not hear a cry echoing from a mountain ridge, but we hear it in quieter ways, in a lonely neighbor, a frightened child, an abandoned animal, or even in our own hearts when hope feels distant. God still calls us to respond. Every act of kindness, every moment of courage, every time we choose compassion over indifference, we become part of a quiet miracle ourselves. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us what part moved you most. And if you believe, as we do, that no soul should ever face fear alone, subscribe to our channel to support stories that heal, uplift, and remind us who we are meant to be. May God bless you and your loved ones. May He watch over every child, every animal, and every weary heart seeking comfort tonight. And may you never forget, even in the darkest places, God is still working, quietly, faithfully, and always with love. Amen.